Everyone, welcome back. Today I'm super excited to have on someone that obviously needs no introduction, Charles Hoskinson, who is the CEO and founder of IOHK, which is the team who leads the research and development for the project Cardano, a project you guys may or may not have heard of. Welcome, Charles. Thanks for coming back onto my channel.
Pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
So let's get started with kind of like an elevator pitch for maybe some people that are new here that have heard of the project but don't actually know what you're all about.
Yeah. So Cardano, I assume you mean Cardano. Yeah. So Cardano is, our view, the first third generation cryptocurrency to hit the market. And basically, what a third generation cryptocurrency is all about is if you look at the history of cryptocurrency, the first generation was Bitcoin, second generation was Ethereum, and the third generation is trying to extend the capabilities that both Bitcoin and Ethereum had and allow these capabilities to work for millions to billions of users, allow these capabilities to be interoperable with as many systems as possible, including legacy financial systems, and also to install a governance system so that it's sustainable. You have a way of sorting out who's going to pay for development and how are decisions going to be made without having a leader at the top or
Sure.
a custodial company like Microsoft or Google. So we launched it in 2015, and it took about 2 years of basic science to get to a point where we were able to start writing code. And in September of 2017, we launched the first mainnet, and that was called Byron. And now we're getting very close to launching the next major upgrade of the system called Shelly, and that's going to include decentralization. And then later updates will add multi-asset accounting and smart contracts and so forth. But it's a big international team, multiple companies working on it. Tweak, Well-Typed, IOHK, a lot of labs, more than 10 universities have been in some way involved, one way or another, to write papers. We've written more than 40 white papers, 20 have gone through peer review. We've written a heck of a lot of code. I think we were #1 last year for GitHub commits.
You were. I saw it myself.
Yeah, and we've grown a lot as a community. We've gone from just a few people to 100,000, and we're listed on more than 25 exchanges. So it's been a pretty wild ride, and it's been amazing to see how to build something like this in a very academic, peer review, formal methodsy way.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to take a lot of risks and fun to get kicked in the face a lot, especially over Twitter.
Yeah, I think most of us experience that for sure. But it does seem like you sometimes seem to be the centralization of a bit more of it than usual, which I don't quite understand. But Twitter can be a not so great place sometimes.
Well, a lot of it's self-inflicted. I shouldn't engage where I
Yeah.
do, and also I've been a member of many different projects like Ethereum and BitShares, and so I've had some good and bad relationships, and those tend to cascade. There's also a lot of fanboyism in the space, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
almost like sports teams, but you actually have real money behind these things, and so people have to win.
Yep. Absolutely. So, in the last year, what accomplishments has Cardano achieved that you're most excited about? Receiving feedback from the community. What have you heard that they like or don't like?
That's a good question. The biggest challenge is when you launch a cryptocurrency, especially the first time your company's done it. It's like a snowflake. It's unique, but in particular, you have to just learn some basic things like working with exchanges and setting up a help desk and building proper software methodology. Like how do you do QA?
Yeah.
How do you measure release cycles and get these things out? So I'm very proud that we've gone through a lot of pivots, but we're still here and we're actually improving. Our original release cycle took quite a bit of time, and every time we do a release, it takes a little bit less time. And we've learned a huge amount along the way about how to write high quality software and also how to write software that's customer focused.
Sure.
For example, when we discovered that in our roadmap, it would take probably about 9 months to a year before we got to a point where we'd be able to mostly resolve the connecting to network issue that some people have. We decided to launch a parallel project called Icarus, and from inception to getting it to the customer took less than 6 months and allowed us to have a browser-based wallet. So one-click install on the Chrome Web Store, and that's been turned into Yoroi. Now 15% of the network's migrated there. Now this was really hard to do because we had to basically write a whole bunch of code from scratch. We wrote Rust code and compiled it to WebAssembly, and we had to port over the Daedalus front end and make it work in the browser. And we did it with a completely parallel team, so we didn't slow down the other teams. But these are examples of major accomplishments where we recognize that maybe things were going too slow or we weren't able to provide a solution in a reasonable period of time due to the roadmap and the way things were evolving. So we were able to find some sort of alternative solution for the community. And the other thing I'm most proud of is how really smart and amazing our community is. Just the other day, I had a great call with a guy named Marcus, and apparently he's trying to get our protocol to work on a Rock Pi. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No.
So it's like a Raspberry Pi on steroids.
Okay.
It's only $70, and they're very low wattage, only like 4 watts, but it's fairly powerful. And what's amazing about these devices is that you can basically run a stake pool with them. So when staking begins, you'll have this small device. Basically, this is how big it is, and this would be with the solid state hard drive and all these other things, and you could run one of the staking pools on that. If you sum up all of the staking pools, you could run all global scale financial system for about 4 kilowatts of power. It's about 3 heaters right there.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and just crazy that one of our community members got this insane idea that he could get our protocol to work on such a low-powered device and still get a reasonable degree of performance. So things like that really make my job fun. There's a lot of hard technology and there's a lot of difficult days, and you're always dealing with trade-offs and what do I do here and what do I do there. But what's really inspiring is when you actually put it all together and people start using it, and you start seeing the feedback. In some cases, pretty crazy. Like I ran into a guy about a year ago who has a Daedalus tattoo on his arm. So you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
I can never change the logo now. So I guess I have to get used to it. So things like that make the job a lot of fun and make it very proud. It's a mixed bag. I wish we would have had a slightly different go-to-market strategy, and I wish we would have architected things differently. But that's woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
If we could go relive life, we would do things very differently. Maybe I would have been a dancer.
I think your talents probably would have been wasted if you were a dancer. And hindsight's always 20/20 anyways.
Right, and I can't dance. So.
Well, that's good to know. So you chose the right path, apparently.
Right.
In reference to the Light wallet that you were talking about, I actually messed around with it as a Chrome browser, and I think that's pretty interesting that you saw a need for it and you were able to sort of take, brain power and branch off to evolve something that there was a need for immediately. And that's, I think, really important in this space is for people to see problems and then see teams recognize them and then at least, at the very least put forth effort. So I think that's pretty cool and definitely a good accomplishment as far as usability and making people's lives easier with the project overall. Because I do know I personally have never had any problems with the Daedalus wallet, but I know that people have.
Right.
So it's good that there's kind of that backup option for sure.
Yeah, and actually, just along that thought, the other magic of having competing wallets is that it actually does force people to start talking around specifications rather than a reference implementation. So you kind of get spoiled if there's only one canonical code base for how things ought to be, and you only have one group of developers, and then every other person basically has to wait for those developers to finish their job, backwards and engineer it, and then they say, okay, now I know how to work it, and I'll go build a client from that. When you start from the beginning having multiple clients, then they actually have to start talking about at the specification level and forcing those specifications to be somewhat implementation independent. So in addition to Icarus and Yoroi really pushing us in one direction, we also launched the Cardano Rust project under Vincent Henquez, and that's been just tremendously successful. In fact, they're moving at a faster pace in certain respects than the Haskell team is, at least for the purpose of getting us to a Shelly testnet, and that's hopefully coming very soon. So the work that they're doing is now forcing the Haskell team to think a little bit more abstractly and a little bit more at the specification level, and also more about interoperability. Instead of creating a monoculture around the ideal perfect Haskell solution, maybe we need to hybridize things in a slightly different way. So I think it is very important, and it's one of the lessons I learned from Ethereum when they had Geth and the C++ client and the Python client, is that diversity of clients in the beginning is very important. It creates a different type of culture, different type of communication flows, and it prevents you from getting into a group think around a particular approach that may be counterproductive in the long term. So I'm very happy we're going down that road. It's a little bit more expensive, but not as much as you'd think, especially if you have the right people.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like a lot of a very good effort. If it was easy, it probably wouldn't be right. So the fact that it's a little bit more difficult and it's taking more time, chances are you're on the right path. At least I'd like to think so. So you kind of mentioned, say that again?
One would hope.
Yeah, one would hope, right? So you touched on the testnet for Shelly, and I know that's definitely a talking point, and I'm sure it's been beat to death, but I came across this question, 1,000 times. So how is the testnet doing? Is the release still kind of on par for when you were saying it was going to be? Do you have any updates on that?
Right. So software estimates are notoriously difficult, especially when you're dealing with emerging technology. So in our view, Shelly was staking, and staking always follows kind of a linear flow. You start with the testnet staking because you have to actually educate people how to do it, how to register pools, and then at some point you get enough assurance that there's sufficient credibility in the protocols that have been implemented and a sufficient critical mass of people that if you were to put this into the mainnet, everything would be okay. So I think there's a pretty good probability that we'll have the Shelly tested out as we stated in Q1.
Cool.
And we already have the task force set up, and that task force is working real hard. They're asking hundreds of questions, and we're almost to the point where we'll start answering those. And they'll run it through several iterations, and a subset of that task force would be rolled over to the testnet that comes out. Likely it'll be a command line testnet, probably the Rust testnet. We'll know more towards the end of this month. We have the entire Rust team together right now in Hong Kong, and they're at the Emergo Hong Kong office, and they're just in basically a month-long brutal hackathon. And I've never heard of a hackathon that long, but they just want to do it. It's a very French hackathon, and they're having fun with it, man. So at the end of that process, we'll either have a testnet out of it or be pretty close to one. And then it's just a question of rolling the people from the stake pool task force into that, getting them quickly registered. And then we're going to run a series of scenarios and stress tests against it. For example, we'll try to make half minus one of the nodes Byzantine and verify that the network still runs. We'll try to DDoS certain pools and see what happens and verify Prouse assumptions work and so forth. Because we have a huge stack of theory that says world ought to work this way.
Yeah.
And it's very nice to empirically validate theory at some point. So we're going to do that, but it doesn't take a lot of time. And then it should be pretty straightforward to connect the Rust client once completed to the Haskell wallet backend, because we're right now decoupling that. So it's a service that can connect to different code bases. And at that point, we can connect the Rust client, the Haskell wallet backend, and Daedalus together. And then it's just a matter of assurance. When do we feel that the code is mature enough? We're already in discussions with Kadelsky about starting the security audit as soon as we can so that we can do a rolling audit. Because if you break the modules apart, there's parts we can audit right now and parts that we have to wait a little bit more time. But we won't release the mainnet till at least we've gone through an end-to-end security audit of all of the parts. The last time we did that was about a year ago, and we have internal auditors, but we feel it's important to have an external audit in addition to the work that we do. But things are looking pretty good. There's two other parts to Shelly too. There's the OBFT hard fork that needs to happen, because that's the first step in getting the protocol ready to accept a new backend. Rust has an OBFT implementation. We need to get it on the Haskell side, and once we have them, then the Rust client can validate the Haskell chain and be a full node and so forth. So that's 1.5. There's only 3 bugs left before we can begin the next wave of regression testing, and so that should come out this quarter. The hard fork itself won't be activated until all of our enterprise actors are onboarded. So that means exchanges and also Yoroi. They need to update their backend, and some of the exchanges are implemented against the V0 API, which is deprecated in V1. So they have to roll over to the new API. So we've been working with the exchanges to verify that that's going to happen, but that fork will happen soon. The other thing is the specifications have to be to a candidate level, meaning that basically we have a corpus of Shelly. So this is a specification for consensus, this is a specification for network, this is a specification for ledger rules and delegation. So ledger rules are done, delegation is done. Ouroboros Prouse / Genesis, we should have a spec for that derived from the code we've written, likely towards the end of the quarter. Maybe they'll slip a week or two, but not significantly. It's not a super complicated spec. And then we'll have 3 candidate network specifications. So the Rust one will be the lowest, easiest hanging fruit. But then we have a very complicated Haskell one that's about half done. And then we have one that we're writing in Scala. So if you go to our GitHub repo, you can actually see ScalaNet, and that's the Scala one that we've been building. And so what we're going to try to do is look at all 3 of these and hybridize one standard before Shelly is fully released. So those are the 3 major milestones for Q1. Get that testnet out, get it rolling, stress test things, get OBFT out, and then get all of the specs out in candidate form. And then moving the next quarter, it's all about a series of rapid updates to the testnet until it gets to basically an RC. It's a release candidate for mainnet. And it's just a matter of timing it so that we can get these things rolled out. So when they merge together and it becomes the mainnet, what will happen is that each epoch, more decentralization will occur. So in epoch 0, we'll have 100% still under the federated system that we're running today. Then Epic 1, 95-5 or something, or like 90-10. And then Epic 2, 90-10 or 80-20 or some ratio like that. So every 5 days, it just keeps getting more and more decentralized until after a few months, the entire network is completely turned over. And it works in both directions. So if all the stake pools doing a job and creating blocks and network quality is right and everything's configured right, then it always progresses. If the chain falls off and more than 50% is not being made correctly, then it'll regress back and go back to the federated mode. So what this means is that no user will experience a disruption during the gradual decentralization, but rewards are starting. So people are making money and inflation is incurring, these types of things. So it kind of gives you a chance to, gradually build a brand and demonstrate that you can do things, and a reputation in the system gives people a chance to register their own stake pools, gives people a chance to do their whole delegation. It also gives us a chance to see how many people actually delegate. There's a bit of a debate inside the organization about auto delegation versus manual delegation. So once you have this large set of registered stake pools, one of the things we could do is just use some set of metrics and auto delegate to a subset of those stake pools if a person chooses not to delegate. We could put that into the protocol or to Daedalus as a default behavior. Another option would be to say, we'll just let people delegate and make that decision completely on their own and not auto-delegate. The problem is that this is a participatory protocol. So if people don't delegate, well, then what happens to that stake? It's kind of useless. So we have to kind of decide, based on numbers, whether auto-delegation by default should be turned on or not. We have a specification for that. And there's technologically nothing hard about that. And it doesn't mean that your money's taken or that your voting's taken. It just means that by default, it'll be auto-delegated to a subset of pools that are chosen by some algorithm. And then you can choose to override that and delegate to who you want. Or you could have a system where no delegation occurs, or that if a stake is inactive for some period of time, that address turns effectively into an enterprise address and it's taken out of the stakeholder set. So these are the kinds of things that we need to basically finalize before we fully roll it out. Some of them can be done on the test net, and some of them are done dynamically.
Sure.
That's why you do gradual decentralization, because you look at that narrow band, how are things happening, and then you can adjust parameters accordingly through a series of soft and hard forks. And then at some point, you have the right sweet spot and you're fully decentralized. The other nice thing is that while that's happening, the Goguen work is still continuing. So the extended UTXO model is going to be fully described and elaborated. This verifier redeemer model of smart contracts we've introduced with Plutus will be rolled in. And so in addition to decentralization gradually occurring, smart contracts will be gradually integrated, and you'll wake up and you'll have a full smart contract ledger alongside a multi-asset accounting system alongside decentralization, and all kind of just pull together. And it'll be a really nice 1.0 product. And then at that point, it's all the road to scaling and all the road to putting sidechains in and all the road to putting governance in.
I love how you say at that point, as if like what you just described in this big, vast story is going to be something very simple and easy. It's funny because I often see on Reddit, on Twitter, all over everywhere, people asking, when Shelly, all this other stuff, when is it going to be done? When is the mainnet? And I think what you really just did was show people and explain to people how absolutely complex this project is, and also how much you guys respect and want it to be successful the first time around. And my view has always been, I think, on par with yours, which is I'd rather have it take longer and be perfect and come out with no issues than placate the community by having it come out earlier and then running into problems.
Right. And we also have a very bad noise to signal ratio in the way we communicate in this space. And everything I say at some point has been misinterpreted or selectively quoted to say something. Like, for example, when I said I'd like Cardano to be the first $1 trillion cryptocurrency, that came with this whole 5-minute explanation of what does that actually mean under the hood. I was talking about a self-sustaining economy. Like when you buy a hamburger, you don't go, oh, wow, the dollar is going up against the euro. I'm going to go and buy some euros to buy a hamburger. You just buy it with dollars, right? Well, I'd like that to happen at some point with the Cardano ecosystem. Well, then, no, they just ran articles. Charles says ADA is going to be $1 trillion by the end of 2020 or something. It's like, come on, guys, this is just dishonest. So, we've always viewed Shelly just like Byron. It's a spectrum, and there's a lot of things you have to do And these are completely new protocols. They're third generation protocols. And so as a consequence, it's irresponsible to just flip a switch and throw them out and say, good luck, everybody. You have to do it in a systematic, methodical way. Now, one of the reasons why people get angry, in my view, over, oh, well, it needs to ship now, is they don't really care if it ships or not. They're just under the impression that once Shelly ships, the price will go up and they'll make money. And if if there's a delay in Shelly, or it takes 6 months to do this, that means they have to wait 6 months to make more money or recover losses from the crypto winter. I mean, nothing will impact price right now. Let me be clear. We could cure cancer and AIDS, and we could go to Mars. Our prices stay the same. We're in a recession. The markets are horrible. Nothing will ever make the price go up. You just have to wait it out. It was very frustrating with Bitcoin when Bitcoin went down to $250, and we were just sitting there and saying, wow, adoption's up. All this VC capital's entering the space. Look at all these amazing things that are happening. And yet it would still stay there or go down. And we said, well, what the hell is going on? This is how markets work. So, if you want to look at the processes and how we're doing things, we're writing a Rust code base, a Haskell code base, formal specifications, peer-reviewed research, and third parties say this stuff is good. Third parties that have no monetary incentive to say that. And all of the work is on GitHub. You can see it every day. We're number one in commits. And there's a very qualified team that's working incredibly hard. So I accept that delays aren't good. But at the end of the day, these were always estimates. We said, we think we can ship here subject to complexity. And it turned out delegation was a hell of a lot harder than we thought it was. It doesn't mean we're incompetent. It just, that's where the science goes. It's the same with Ouroboros. It's like, well, we had Ouroboros Classic, and that was a synchronous protocol, when we decided that we'd want it to be semi-synchronous and protected from adaptive corruption and have forward security. And we decided, oh yeah, it'd probably be a good idea to be able to bootstrap from the Genesis like proof of work can. That requires a lot more research and requires heavier weight protocols and things like VRFs and so forth. And so these things just take time to implement, and they take time to carefully think about.
Sure.
We don't have a code base we can go and fork, and we don't have a marketing machine that makes a fork of Ethereum look like it's completely new, and we can't just go buy a Silicon Valley company and pretend like we earned their 12 years of history. So the best we can do is just be real with people and explain when and how things are going to happen. And so far, I think we're moving really quickly, and I like the progress we have. I like the fact that things are speeding up.
That's good to hear, obviously, because coming from you, I think that matters more than everybody's opinions on, crypto, Twitter, and whatever. So that's good. So I've been reading that you guys, plan to add some form of mobile implementation into the Daedalus wallet. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the first thing that we have to do is get good light clients. And so right now, the light client experience is there's a bifurcation. So if you have a light client, you get UTXO and you get state shipped to you from a trusted third party, like an Explorer or something like that. So some third party is basically your Oracle, and it's providing you everything you need to run your client. So as a consequence of them running the full node, you're basically an interface, and you control the private keys. So you have some security, but you can be lied to. So it would be really cool if we can say, hey, could we get rid of that middleman and allow you to run a client with little to no data, but yet you still have the same security as if you had the entire blockchain. The good news is the sidechains proof that we did, the sidechains work, the proof of stake sidechains, allows us to actually do this. So how it works is you take the UTXO, you take the Merkle root of that, put it in header periodically, safe space, maybe every 10 headers or something like that. So then what you would do is you would have a call in the network protocol that allows you just to query the UTXO from anybody. So somebody would send it to you who has a full node. And then you would check that against the checkpoint. And then we have a construct called a TMS. It's a primitive that we introduced in the proof of stake paper. And you recursively can go through those all the way back to Genesis block. And just that information set alone allows you to verify that the history you're looking at is correct, and gives you a very strong security guarantee that the history you're looking at is correct. So we're going to formalize all this and put it in as a spec for a light client. But once we have that, it means you only have to download very little data, like kilobytes to a few megabytes, to be able to actually have the entire state of the system that's useful for you and spend your money. So the next step after that protocol is fully fleshed out is to put it into Daedalus and switch the user experience of Daedalus from full node by default to light node by default. So when you first install clean installation, you download the client, it just gets that UTXO, and boom, you either import your wallet or you create a new wallet and you're ready to use it. And then as a background process, it'll go ahead and download the full and upgrade itself to a full node through the normal peer-to-peer network. So once that's in place, it's very trivial for us to then build cell phone applications and so forth. But it is a strategic decision whether we'll make an official cell phone application for Daedalus or we'll just let Yoroi run that. They already have an Android client, and I believe they'll have an iOS client soon. And they have a good release cycle, and they're scaling their team up. And they seem to be able to keep parity with features, in some cases even create features faster than us, like for the case of Ledger support. So within 6 months, I think they're just going to have an awesome client that provides access to hardware wallets, paper wallets. It'll be able to stake or at very least delegate. So you'll have all those usability characteristics, and it'll be on Android and iOS, and it's open source code for the most part. And I suspect at some point they'll do another security audit. The Icarus client was security audited. So it's a secure, it's a fast evolving, it's a very good experience. So what value would we add to the ecosystem by adding another mobile client? I'm not so sure that's the best idea, but we'll think about it. It might be better to spend our money somewhere else, like for example, adding Lightning support to the protocol. Every time you release something, you have to think about the consequences of releasing it. There's going to be users in it, money in it. It means you have to put a help desk. It means that you have to have a QA system for it. It means you have to update it when bugs are discovered. It's always it's easy to get in. It's like a war. It's easy to start it. It's easy to invade the country, but you have to have an exit strategy. Like, how do we get out once we achieve victory? In some cases, you have no exit strategy. You just have to support the damn thing forever. It's almost like Microsoft with Windows XP. They're like, God, guys, Windows 10 or 7 or Vista, pick one or 8, pick one. But for God's sakes, just don't use XP. And there's still infrastructure using Windows XP, even though it was released in 2001. I mean, if you look at that equivalent band of time, that's like 2001 being on the original Mac in the 80s. So but yeah, people are not upgrading. So what does Microsoft do? Do they continue supporting it? Do they continue providing patches for it? And they keep saying no, but every now and then they have to update something because they get asked to do it. So it's challenging. So we're very conservative in terms of platforms we support and where we go, and Daedalus will certainly be one, but whether that goes mobile or not, I'm not sure. But the light mode will certainly come. That's a high priority for the second half of 2019.
Yeah, I asked that because I was curious if you making a mobile application for Daedalus was going to be kind of like counterproductive if the Ledger came out and supported it, if they would be kind of something that worked in unison, or if they were something that were sort of fighting against each other. So I was kind of curious about that. Was the whole purpose behind the question.
Okay, yeah, and also it's important not to have monoculture again. So it is nice to have multiple mobile experiences.
Sure.
I think Ledger Nano X is going to have a really good mobile experience. I heard that you could just have the Ledger and it connects to the app, and there's like 100 currencies.
Oh, I'll let you know. I'm pre-ordered.
Okay, good. Let me know the experience there. We have one too, so we'll see what happens with that. The other one that's really exciting is KeepKey. I just talked to the Shapeshift guys, and apparently they're putting a DEX right into KeepKey. So
really? I have a KeepKey. I did an unboxing video. I actually really like that wallet. It's very sleek.
Yeah, they gave me one, and I said I'll open it when they upgrade the software, and I'll be able to beta test it, and I'll let you know on that one too.
Very cool. So I have 2 questions that are coming up that you get often, and you're probably sick of answering them, but I figure everybody's asking for them in the comments right now. So I know that Ledger support is ideally around the corner. I saw a tweet from you that had mentioned probably March of this year. Are we still on target for that?
Yeah, so there were 3 things that had to happen for that. One was Vacuum Labs was doing a major update to the code that had been done for Ledger support. My understanding is that update is completely finished. So now it has to be merged into Ledger, and usually they do that monthly. So March, that'll probably get pulled in.
Okay.
And then Yoroi has to have support for that. But they already have a framework for that from Trezor. So they'll probably reuse what they did with Trezor and have a similar user experience for Ledger. So I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be March, but we're not directly writing that code. It's being done by Emergo. That said, Sebastian and Nico are very good. Sebastian comes from Microsoft, and Nico's done this for a long time. And I have a lot of faith in their abilities. So I think they should be able to complete their side. Ledger should be able to do what they need to do. But the integration code is done, and it's tested.
Cool.
Vacuum Labs did it, and they spent 3 months on it, actually. It was quite a bit of work, but they got it done.
Is the implementation for the Ledger Nano S different than the X? Are they both going to be supported, or is it kind of going to take more work?
My understanding is they can use both of them.
Cool.
That's my understanding. I think the principal difference between the S and the X is that the X has more resources, better hardware, but I think they're using the same software on it. But I didn't look too closely on that. We're just worried about right now S, and then if X does require a modification, it's likely going to be a very minor modification. It also opens up a question of how would you use your ADA with the Ledger Nano X and their mobile app, and I haven't quite gotten an answer yet on that. But I'd make it a high priority, and if it means we just have to do a little bit more work through vacuum, we definitely do that. We have a nice workflow for that.
So my second frequent question is, obviously you're the CEO of IOHK, which is the lead development aspect of Cardano right now. And once your contract, or whatever you want to call it, is up with Cardano, I know that IOHK plans to resubmit their bid to continue being a part of the project. But I mean, I guess, is that like, what's the scenario if that doesn't happen? What do you think the odds are that there's actually somebody else that comes in and bids and gets voted on by the community?
I've always viewed it as a net positive to the community. If at the end of the day, somebody beats us, they beat us because they're legitimately going to do a better job, and that they're actually going to provide more value for the ecosystem. These are not monopolies. I'm not a king. I'm a service provider, and there's good, bad, and ugly. We make mistakes, and we have this collection of capabilities. And if the industry's in a different position by the end of 2020, there may be companies better suited to carry Cardano to the next level than us. And at the end of the day, they could be larger companies like IBM or Microsoft, for example, that have even more resources than we do. So we're going to just keep doing our job, keep our head down, execute very quickly, get as much as we can done, and make sure that Cardano is in a position where it can be self-determining. It can decide where it wants to go and have money available to put a financial commitment behind that vision and that direction. And then the ADA holders get to decide what's in their best interest. Honestly, I think it'll probably end up being a multi-client environment and a multi-vision environment, just like Ethereum is, with Parity Tech having their chunk of the world and others having their chunk. And IOHK will probably get some funding to maintain what it's already constructed. And my hope is that we'll see emerging out of the ether a lot of other developers who are offering better experiences for certain domains. Like, for example, at some point we have to segregate the retail and the enterprise clients from each other and build specific features that only the enterprise is going to care about. And the retail, maybe we start moving in directions to harden security, like going to the direction of SGX support and things like that. So I'd love to see a different company take and tackle that on, maybe even a cryptocurrency exchange actually tackle that on and go in that direction. And if there's funding for that, that's fine. There's also some discussions about use of funds. For example, we could bathe all of Africa with an ATM network, and that would probably only cost in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, but then give accessibility to tens to hundreds of millions of people throughout the continent for basically cryptocurrency access, where they can put in Burr and out comes ADA, put in ADA, out comes Burr. We could build a DEX and try to populate that whole thing and create liquidity for everybody, and then make sure that there's easy entry and exit points to some sort of value stable token or Bitcoin. So there's a lot of directions we could go, and that's not for me to decide. The whole point of a treasury system is to say that third parties are in a position to dream and then propose those dreams to the general community to actually vote on. And my conjecture, and actually what we've seen from empirically from cryptocurrencies that have gone down this road, is that it actually prevents forks and it actually prevents community division. Because instead of saying, we're just going to talk over Reddit or Twitter or some very high noise to signal ratio channel, we're actually going to have debates that converge to funding. And then that implies a particular direction and prioritization and focus for the entire ecosystem. So when you get to the hard fork, well, you've already paid for this code to be written for that hard fork, so you probably support the hard fork.
Sure.
So you've made that decision before the code was even written. You've made that decision before it was even decided. Like, for example, if we were to come and say, well, if you want Lightning support, it'll cost $5 million or whatever, and the community accepts that. We go and write all that code, and by the time it comes to maybe fork it in if it's necessary, you would be really surprised if the community said, actually, on second thought, no, don't do that. So, like, you just paid me $5 million to go and do that. I mean, you guys are pretty crazy, right? You've already had that fight before anything was done to go and pursue that. So my conjecture is that these processes will make the system much more rich. It also means the meetup groups are much more productive, because instead of just being a place for fanboys and talk about philosophy, you actually have real power. Say, how should we vote? what should we do? What do we think we should do? And it also means you basically built a giant VC in the sky to pay for everything from marketing to infrastructure to not-for-profit things to evangelism to everybody's favorite DApp without having to do an ICO to fund these types of things. So it's a great social experiment, and it's one that has to be handled carefully. We've been working on it for well over a year and a half. Roman Olenikov and Bin Cheng and the rest of the team there at Lancaster. I've already written a paper. It's been accepted to NDSS, and we've been investigating many different things like using liquid democracy, for example. The advantage is we kind of have like the first generation of the voting done with delegation, because really what you're doing is you're saying this ADA entitles me to have a voice in who should be in control. So the first thing I can vote on is, stake pools. And either I can register my own and vote for myself, or I can vote for someone else. And I happen to make some profit if they win, great. But that's generation one. And then taking those very same mechanics, we can then add a liquid democracy style voting system. And then you can just keep adding more complexity as you go through. So that's going to consume a huge amount of my time in 2020. And it's the big focus of the year. That and scalability. Scalability is actually pretty easy at this point. We have a very clear path of how we're going to get there. The papers are getting more elegant, and they're actually getting shorter, which is telling you that we're really getting to what we need to do. Whereas governance is just messy, and it's how the sausages are made, and it's never going to be perfect, and there's a million opinions on how to do it. I mean, if anything, just look at the state of U.S. politics. If governance was easy, why are we at where we're at? And point to one country where the political system is super stable and everybody's happy. You can't. Mm-hmm. So we'll just work our way through that. And I think by the end of 2020, not only is the community going to be in a position to be self-determining and decide where they want to go, but then it forces me to make the case why we're the company to get there. And we'll be just one of many voices, and there's going to be a lot of divergence. And that's great, because once a path is chosen, it has a democratic mandate behind it, and people will just simply feel more empowered.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. So can the developer community expect to see a pickup in the amount of educational courses specific to developing on the platform in the short term? This is actually a pretty popular question on Reddit. It seems there's a lot of people that are interested in that.
Yeah, so we have a three-prong approach for that. One is to work with third parties. So we talked to the Clio guys, and they have already created one Plutus course, but we're going to work closely with them to try to create as much educational material as we can. And we're going to try to advocate for the Cardano Foundation to give them a grant to do that. Once that model's been filled out, it'd be nice to see some diversity and have multiple grants go out for multiple educational materials that are localized to different things, to different regions and to different language parents. Right now it's English, but it would be cool to get French and Japanese and Russian and so forth. So that's one dimension. The second dimension is we have an education department at IOHK. Lars Munoz runs it. I actually just had a meeting with him today. He's still in Ethiopia, and he's training 23 Ethiopian gals, 19 from Ethiopia, 4 from Uganda, in Addis Ababa to learn Haskell, but there's a Plutus component to that course as well.
That's cool.
So once we get these courses to a more reasonable state, what we're going to do is we're going to scale them up considerably and try to train hundreds and do courses in parallel. And they'll take an increasingly more smart contract bend than just a functional programming bend. And at that point, it gives us a nice core of in-house developers and external assets that have been trained to learn how to use our tools. And hopefully we can attach the best of those classes to funding and attach the best of those classes to interesting tasks so that they can go start innovating. And the third part is a hackathon strategy. So you're really good when you're able to bring external entities in and make them care about the things you have. So we'd like to run a lot of hackathons. I just went to ETH Denver, and it had over 2,000 people and 4 floors hackathons. It's really amazing to see what they were able to accomplish there. So it'd be really cool to replicate that. And that was an organic group. It doesn't have any huge funding from the Ethereum Foundation, or it wasn't centrally planned. It was just bottom up, and they went from nothing to 2,000 in just a few years. So I think we can achieve the same ends. And what we'll do is try to be strategic and run many of them across the world, in some cases in parallel. And the goal there is to encourage people to try out our tooling, our libraries, Plutus, and build stuff and see if they like it. And at some point, you get 500 to 1,000 really good projects, and those are the bellwethers that demonstrate your space and carry you to the next generation.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm sure people will be interested to know that too, because like I said, it was pretty popular, and it's nice to see enthusiasm and people wanting to have educational content in order to start sort of prepping for being able to build on the platform. So that's pretty cool. So someone on Twitter asked about the Traxia project and their team, if you know much about them.
That was an Emergo venture, and I've met them. They seem to be nice guys. We were in Korea when I met them, and we had some barbecue together. Interesting project, interesting people, but I don't know too much about the terms or the economics. I'm
Okay.
glad that they're coming to Cardano, and I hope that they have a lot of success. And when the time comes for them to actually migrate from Ethereum to Cardano, we'd love to work with them to help them with that migration, to try to make it as painless as possible. Our model is a little different. Extended UTXO with redeemer validator style smart contracts is kind of just like Bitcoin script on steroids, but it's given a real programming language, so it has a lot of power, and you get a lot, I'd say, more tooling in your back pocket to ensure that your contracts are correct and secure. But it is distinctly different from the Ethereum counts model, and as a consequence, you have to think a little carefully about how are you going to move that infrastructure over. We probably will deploy a KVM or just an EVM sidechain. So if you really want to deploy in that domain, you can, but then you wouldn't be taking a lot of the benefits of the Cardano model and a lot of the cool features that we're going to have with Plutus and so forth. So at the end of the day, it's ultimately the ambition of the project for how much retooling and refactoring and rewriting they want to do, and also what are their priorities? Are their priorities growth? Are their priorities good infrastructure? And we're trying to have a nice basket of solutions for all of them. And hopefully, we'll be able to have that discussion with Trexia soon.
Very cool. So, what's your view on the Blockchain Interoperability Alliance? So, projects that are included are like OneChain, Ion, Icon. Somebody wants to know where Cardano and ADA fit into that.
Yeah, well, you don't need a token to be interoperable. That's one thing. It's a bit puzzling to me when people sell tokens and they create projects and they say this is the interoperability token. It's like, point of interoperability is that you have value and information. So you want to take information from one system and inject it into another system, and vice versa. And you want to move value from one system to another system. Now, these can be unidirectional, where you just move the value, and you're like going from Bitcoin to Litecoin, or it can be bidirectional, where you're doing a swap. And that's called usually an atomic cross-chain swap. So in my view, if you want to be interoperable, what you need to do is first understand the theory of how ledgers can communicate with each other and what properties ought you care about. You ought to care about firewalling, so that if one of these systems blows up, it doesn't impact another system. So they're all encapsulated from each other. And you also want the minimum amount of information required to be transferred over, and the minimum amount of state knowledge of that system required, so you can validate that the tokens you're receiving exist and that they haven't been double spent. So we have a whole corpus of science that we built. It's one of the, I'd say, the two major accomplishments, maybe three, of the Cardano project: Plutus, Ouroboros, but the third certainly sidechains. And we have two dimensions of that. One is in the proof of work side with the NEPA PALs, and the other is the TMS stuff we've done with proof of stake. But in both cases, they formally define a theory of how you can move value and information between chains, and do this in a way without centralized coordination. So it's a non-interactive protocol. You can just move it, and it doesn't require permission. It doesn't require a middleman. It doesn't require some kludgy weird matching protocol. You just move it over. So that's a really cool thing. But interoperability is a game of pragmatism. The world is littered with people who had superior protocols, but then the market moved in a different direction. There's a reason we use Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but not other standards. Those standards, one, like it or not, accept it. You got to put it in your phone. You got to put it in your tablet. So it's the same situation here. So what we'll probably do is pragmatically work with Interledger and integrate that. And we'll also probably build Lightning support into Cardano, because it looks like that's going to eventually be a big bridge for interoperability. And then maybe we'll end up supporting some form of a DEX and allow people to do atomic trust chain swaps.
Cool.
Through that. So with those mechanisms, I think that's a really good starting point for interoperability. I'm hesitant to embrace any standard that requires me to use a third-party token, because basically what I've done is I've created a centralized gatekeeper for a decentralized gatekeeper. but that is probably not even decentralized. It's probably federated or controlled only by a small group. And I don't want my network to only be good because some other system is good. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's more of a situation of I need to talk to people, and I need to have economic conversations with people. And so let's agree on a consistent protocol to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they support it, then it's the user's decision of how they want to flow around the system and what they want to accomplish. Closely related to this is oracles. How do you inject information into a system?
Sure.
Most smart contracts only get good if oracles are there. Like, for example, I'll give you $1,000 if the Denver Broncos win the Super Bowl. Well, how does the system know the Denver Broncos have won the Super Bowl versus the Steelers or the Patriots or any other team? Somebody has to tell it. Now, that can be centralized, or you can have a company. Bloomberg has certainly made a lot of money from that. Or you can try to use some clever math, like component analysis or something, and somehow federate things together and get a empirical notion of truthiness behind the data that you have, right? And Stephen Colbert can come in and tell you something. So there's a lot of routes for that, but that's a closely related topic, interoperability, because a lot of cases you're just shipping metadata around or just confirming that events have happened, or verifying things like insurance contract needs to know something has occurred, and it'll trigger if and only if, or not trigger if and only if. And so that's just as important to our systems as the ability to move value from one person to the next. In fact, I'd argue far more important. The last point is metadata. Interoperability requires this, and you have to have a really intense conversation about, well, who controls that? The example I love to give is if Bob is withdrawing $500 on Christmas from an ATM right next to a Chinese restaurant, and you happen to know that his entire family has flown out, will you immediately say, oh, that money was for him to pay in cash, take his whole family out for Christmas? You withdraw $500 next to a brothel at 2:30 in the morning, you'd probably think something different.
Yeah.
Now, it's the same transaction. It's Bob getting $500 from his account to cash. Okay. But the metadata around that story is very different. Now, here's the problem. What happens if somebody has the power to switch those? Then something innocent can seem nefarious. So we'd like our metadata to have the same property as our money and be immutable and be auditable and time-stamped and know that it hasn't been messed with.
Sure.
But then we also want our metadata to probably be private. Like, you probably don't want people to know what you're spending your money on. I don't, for the most part. So it would be really important that we be able to extract some sort of guarantee that, well, the data is private. We can verify once presented the information that that is actually legitimate. So the simplest form of transaction for that I can think of is something called contingent settlement. So basically, imagine if we enter an agreement saying, I'm going to give you $100 worth of ADA if you mow my lawn. Well, we have a contract, we write it up. What I do is I take the hash of that contract and I embed it in the transaction and sign it. Sent to you, doesn't clear, so it's sitting in pending. And then you sign that agreement and assign the hash of it, and then both hashes are then present in the settled transaction. So an outside observer, all they see is a transaction, some funds moving, and some metadata associated with it, but it's meaningless. It's just signed hashes. But then if there's a commercial dispute, you say, oh, well, I say she didn't mow the lawn. Well, look at the contract. It's there, and I can litigate that. Now, that one foundation, if extended to multiple parties, along with smart contracts, can allow you to build up all kinds of really intricate and beautiful systems. But here's the point. I build that for Cardano, but what happens when we have one for Bitcoin or one for Litecoin or Ripple or these other things? So how do we translate between these systems? There does need to be an industry-wide standard of how are we going to write legal agreements, open laws looking at this? How are you going to embed these types of things? And how are we going to deal with transactional metadata in a sensible way so that you can, when desired, be able to prove that certain characteristics there for compliance, for contract law, whatever it might be. So those are, I think, the three major things. You have to be pragmatic and adopt whatever protocol the industry has. So if BIA has one and that becomes a thing of who cares my preference, I have to adopt it. Second, you have to think really carefully about foundational research and good definitions, and actually be very specific on what you mean by interoperability. And that's what we did with the sidechains research. And it also gives us great clients for damn near free. And then you also have to think around topics like injection of information to the system, as well as metadata as a whole and standards for metadata between different systems.
Very cool. I feel like you guys have put so much thought into so many different aspects. It's like every time I ask you a question, you have such good inner knowledge on kind of the best ways to, or not, maybe not necessarily the best ways, but very well thought out ways to go about resolving the issues. So that's quite impressive.
I've just been in this space a long time.
Yeah. Well, but that's good though. I mean, experience is helpful. So
well, it's hard to build this stuff. And even if you do it right, doesn't mean anybody's going to actually adopt it. So there's kind of an art of knowing when to quit and
Yeah.
knowing when to pivot. And sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't.
Sure, absolutely. So, what are your thoughts on the recent legislation in Wyoming? Somebody asks. Do you think it's appropriate? Do you think there's anything missing, and do you think other states might follow on this path?
One of the biggest problems of doing business in the United States in the financial industry, when you're talking about emerging products, is not a situation of you disagreeing with regulation or agreeing with regulation. It's often uncertainty.
Yeah.
So you're basically told, hey, nobody knows what the rules are, but if you ever do break them, retroactively we'll hold that against you and you go to jail and you get big fines. And you say, well, that's just great. And then your bank is told, well, if you ever do business with somebody in this field, if we determine that this is a bad deal, you're gonna get big fines or lose your licensure. And so the MSB is like, well, that's too risky of a customer. I don't want to bank them. So by doing nothing or introducing uncertainty, what the regulator does is effectively damage the industry.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it hard to get a bank account. It makes it hard to do legitimate business. It's hard to get government contracts. And it's hard for Fortune 500 companies to actually get involved, because if they end up doing something that ends up being illegal, and it's illegal, always illegal, not just we just passed a law and made it illegal. It was always illegal. We just interpreted the law this way to make it illegal. Then they get sued by their shareholders or fired or run criminal charges. So uncertainty kills industries. And what Wyoming is doing is that they worked with a lot of people, and they're creating a series of sensible pieces of legislation that are creating some clarity about what the business environment is like in Wyoming. There's some that I like, there's some to dislike. Most of it I like. But what it does for me is at least lets me know what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can have a discussion with lawyers and accountants and consultants, usually very expensive ones, who have dubious value, and then stitch these different actors together and create a strategy of how do we stay in compliance and how do we stay competitive despite compliance. So, for example, Japan has clarity for the most part. If you're an exchange, you know what the process is to get it an exchange, and if you want to list a cryptocurrency, you know the process. Much to my dismay, they've created such a draconian process that since November of 2017, no new tokens have been listed on Japanese exchanges. So while we like to get ADA in that marketplace through their official channels, they've just made it very difficult because of CoinCheck. And so that's an example of where clarity exists, but it's not a competitive environment. Now, contrast that with Singapore or Switzerland, where clarity exists for the most part. In some cases, the regulators are in a Telegram group, and you can just directly ask them, which is pretty crazy.
That is crazy.
And you also have a good operating environment. So I'd say for the most part, Wyoming's a good operating environment, especially if you offer products and services to people outside the United States, and you stay away from heavily regulated topics like IPOs and ICOs. And I think that's a good indication of where states can innovate despite the federal government. And the hope is that the federal government will be inspired by the innovation there and eventually pass legislation or reinterpret existing regulatory mandates towards a more libertarian model that allows this industry to grow. But whether the U.S. embraces it or not, the boat's sailed. The cryptocurrency industry is quite large, and it's just basically saying, do you want to sit this one out, or do you want to be a world leader? If the U.S. embraces the crypto industry, it'll be the best jurisdiction in the world to build a cryptocurrency business. If it doesn't, within 5 years, they'll lose that entire industry. And they've already lost a big chunk of it. A lot of them have offshored to Switzerland or to other jurisdictions like South Korea or Liechtenstein or Singapore.
Well, I mean, we've seen it with the ICO market, right? So last year it was like everything was an ICO, let's tokenize all the things. And then this year it's all this uncertainty around regulation and SEC in the US. And because of that, now everybody's moving to like STOs because they think that maybe it'll be a safer bet and there'll be more regulation and less uncertainty and so on. So I agree with you that I think there's some plus sides to regulation in the sense that, yes, we have rules and we know kind of where our limitations and our boundaries are. And then also not great, like you said, in Japan, if they kind of go overboard and then there's no competition and there's no real interest in making new projects because it's so difficult to get on exchanges. So definitely a balancing act, but I do hope that the U.S. sort of wakes up to just how big the industry is. But I guess time will really tell with something like that.
Right. They can't even figure out how to pay for a wall right now. So I think the United States government has different priorities.
Probably.
Than our poor industry.
Yeah.
But I agree with you completely. I really hope that the United States embraces this like it did the internet, like it did the
Sure.
software industry, and doesn't go insane. I mean, at one point, it was illegal to sell things online. It was called the NSF AUP, the National Science Foundation Acceptable Use Policy. And their whole argument for not allowing commerce was that the internet would become a cesspool of spam and pornography, which did happen. But we got Amazon out
Yeah,
of that deal
it's
too.
true.
So, so I think that the benefits outweighed the cost. And regulation exists for a reason. Consumers are definitely getting hammered in certain respects. Over 70% of the ICOs last year, according to a University of Pennsylvania Law School paper that was over 100 pages long, in some way were fraudulent, meaning that the claims that they made did not fit the code or reality or the conduct of the founders. So when you have an industry where 7 out of 10 offerings are problematic in some way, not even looking at the procedural side of things, the securities law side of things, just looking at consumer fraud, then a regulator has a moral obligation to understand path to improving the industry. The question is, should the industry improve itself through technology and SROs, or should it be done by the heavy hand of government? And in my experience, especially looking at what's happened in Japan, when the heavy hand of government gets involved, it generally just solves no problem and it creates black markets. Japanese people who don't get listed, they just buy unlisted tokens off of foreign exchanges. Is that really great for people living in Tokyo and Osaka that they now have to leave the regulatory harness of Japan and go buy from foreign companies and foreign exchanges,
Yeah.
which may have bad regulation or no regulation? And the CEO, if he dies, you lose all your money. That's real bad deal. But
Yeah.
bad regulation creates those black markets, which ultimately hurt the very people you're trying to protect. So yeah, it's a balancing act, and it's a very difficult balancing act. And I think sometimes bureaucrats don't fully appreciate how much power they really have
Sure.
and how badly they can hurt people's lives if they make poor decisions.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, my last question is someone is curious on your thoughts on how to increase crypto asset adoption and how Cardano integration with smartphone manufacturers is coming along, or if that's even kind of on the horizon.
So there were two different opportunities to get Cardano into smartphones. One was through the Serum Labs, and it's never clear to me if we're actually on the Finny or not, because I went to their offices, I talked to Moshi, and it's a very unique person. And they said, yeah, we're supporting ADA, and that's happening. But I have a Finny. I gave it to the product officer for Cardano, and he's going to play around with it. And I'll ask him if ADA's on it or not. But it's not clear to me if it is or not. I'm sorry, I'm angry there. But I know that Emergo at one point negotiated a deal for them to do that. And there's no reason that it ought not to be. It's basically like bolting a ledger onto a smartphone.
Yeah.
So that's probably not too hard. Now, a much more meaningful way of getting it integrated would be through basically somehow connecting it into the SIM card and connecting it to trusted hardware that's actually in the phone itself for consumer phones, like an iPhone or an Android phone. And Rivets is trying to do that with Telefonica or whatever it is, that very large Latin American telephone provider. And we had some discussions with Stephen about joining an alliance and finding a way to get Cardano into the phone, and that would instantly give like 40 million subscribers access or something like that. So we're definitely looking that direction, and that'll come. These things have just so many capabilities.
Yeah.
And the SIM cards are getting very sophisticated, and the hardware is very sophisticated. So getting integrated crypto wallets is not so hard. And we heard rumors that Samsung is moving in that direction as well. And Sony's actually moving in that direction. They're creating some sort of hardware wallet. So within, I'd say, 1 to 3 year horizon, we'll have a path to mass adoption through those devices, and it'll likely couple a trusted hardware solution, which means you can do offline and off-chain transactions. So you don't actually have to be connected to the internet to send a cryptocurrency to someone else. And then when reconciliation happens, everything's still balanced as if you were online and had a full node. In the interim, I think a path to mass adoption is marrying permission ledgers and among verticals with permissionless ledgers. So one that we're very keen to aggressively pursue is AgTech. And we're looking a lot at supply chain management within agricultural technology. So, you think about coffee farming, for example. This is an example that I often give. In Ethiopia, I have about 1.5 million coffee farmers that are mostly undocumented and unbanked, and they live on usually less than a hectare of land. And when they grow their beans, they put it on the back of a donkey and they carry it to a washing station, and it gradually works its way to the commodity exchange. Well, there are huge international pressures on these countries to improve their supply chains and start getting real data about what's happening. fair trade requirements, carbon
Hmm.
reduction requirements, biodiversity requirements, private companies like Starbucks saying that we're only going to buy beans if X, Y, and Z is here. So either you get blacklisted from the market and pushed out or embargoed, or you comply. But complying can be very expensive. So there's been a lot of discussion about applying blockchain solutions into AgTech for supply chains. Well, what does this functionally mean? To accomplish that, you have to identify and create digital assets for all of these people. Not assets in terms of a token, but things like wallets and things like certificates and ways of managing public-private key
Yeah.
pairs. Once all that infrastructure is in place, that same infrastructure can also use tokens. So you could have a dollar coin or you could have ADA and you could use that for lending. So I can connect a permissioned ledger into a permissionless system like Cardano, and then somebody can build a microfinance app that's like Kiva, or somebody can build an insurance app, or somebody can build a remittance app.
Hmm.
And then that coffee farmer can say, hey, I and these 12 other farmers would like a loan so that we can stump our trees and increase our yield. And if you give it, then you get reasonable returns. Or in some cases, there are even backed loans where international aid bodies can just guarantee the repayment if the farmer defaults. So this is, I think, the way of getting mass adoption. One direction is to get it into consumer devices like Facebook Messenger and on your cell phone, and that'll happen naturally with or without us. The big guys will wake up and start doing that
Yeah.
regardless. And the other way is to go and identify underserved markets and say, well, we have to digitize them, get identities for them and digital assets for them. Anyway, it's going to happen. So
Hmm.
let's go do that and connect it to the permissionless systems. And then basically anybody can just instantly get banked. They can get a loan. They can get insurance. They can send money home. Like when the daughter goes to England to be a maid and sends $100 a month home to her parents, instead of doing that through a really slow system that gobbles up 15% of the
Yeah.
transaction, just convert it into a token, send it through. And it's not hard to convince people in these jurisdictions that this is the way to go. If you look at Ethiopia, 70% of the population is under the age of 30. And most of them are aware of cryptocurrencies, are internet savvy, and fully understand the need for financial diversity because they live in an economy with not such good money.
Sure.
So when you put these types of scenarios, when you're going making the case for cryptocurrencies, I'd much rather make the case to a young person that's unhappy with their money and doesn't have access to legacy financial services than a 60-year-old person who's very happy with their money who has access to legacy financial services. And that's the only thing they've ever known, and they've never seen an economic collapse.
Yeah.
So I just think that it's a better allocation of resources and marketing and time and effort, even though per person they're much poorer. There is a lot of money flowing into these economies. There's this misnomer that Africans have no money. China's put $1 trillion into that continent, 1 trillion, and
That's a
the
lot of
economies
money.
are all growing 5 to 15% per year.
Hmm.
And they're all of our tech they have access to, and they don't have to pay the price of building it. So I think that Africa is a very promising area, and the permissioning blockchain side of things will be a massive driver of adoption, of getting people into the
Yeah.
cryptocurrency space. Now, of course, I'm biased, so if I connect people to anything, I'm going to connect them to Cardano
Well, yeah,
and
naturally.
Ethereum. So if Vitalik wants to come play with us in Ethiopia, we'd be happy to connect them to Ethereum as well. But I guess that's their prerogative and their priorities.
Yeah, so I actually agree with you. The Africa thing situation, I learned a lot just now because I guess I just wasn't aware of, well, I was aware of probably the needs, but not necessarily the funding aspect of things. But the whole cell phone aspect, the thing that I always say when I'm doing a video or I'm on my channel is that getting people to use it when they don't know necessarily that they're using it or they have just easy access to it and it's user friendly is how we get like my generation of people to actually start using something. So when it's less
Right.
scary, I think, is when it's going to just be like, okay, well, I'll at least test it out and try. Whereas right now, there's private keys and all these different addresses, and it's just intimidating for the average person. So I think
Right.
kind of packaging it up and putting a pretty bow on it and putting it in an iPhone would make it so much easier.
And it'll get better over time. I mean,
Yeah.
this is where people make fortunes. It's you have generations. So the first generation of the internet was all about just getting infrastructure. So people had to lay the cables, they had to
Sure.
design the routers, they had to get the protocols out. And then at some point we said, let's talk about access to that infrastructure. So we had to build out the ISPs and the web browsers and create standards and then capabilities for developers to create experiences. And then those developers went and created the Facebooks and the Googles and the YouTubes and the other companies that now dominate the internet. So right now we're in the infrastructure phase. We're still trying to figure out how to be sustainable and scalable and interoperable, and how do we build a cohesive experience that is reasonably secure. And then the next wave of entrepreneurs will be obsessed with user experiences, and they're going to go and figure that out. And then suddenly grandma can use it with no problem. It's, in my view, an invalid complaint to say, oh, well, grandma can't use crypto right now. That's like saying, well, grandma can't use email and it's 1988. Of course. But you know what? Her grandson will. And when he does, that's going to consume a massive component of his life. And his kid is going to be on Telegram and Snapchat all day long. So, these things increasingly dominate each generation's lives. And so I'm in the infrastructure phase. So that's what I'm focused on. And I said, let's do it with peer review and formal methods and involve the universities so that the system we end up having to live with for the next 50 years at least has some foresight in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some rigor behind it, so we don't repeat the mistakes of JavaScript or TCP/IP. And at the end of the day, if we get it right, then we can very gradually move into the experiences side. And there, I have no doubt it'll get done because there's mammoth financial incentives. You create great experiences, get 10 million users, you're a billionaire.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of people fighting like hell with tons of money behind them to worry about that stuff. And that's boring. They'll figure it out. They'll get it done. And even if they don't get it done, the people who've already figured out experiences like Google and Apple and Microsoft will just add it to their systems. We'll wake up one day and Microsoft Windows will have a cryptocurrency wallet in it. And just like they now have Cortana, and you have Siri on your phone and so forth. That was a DARPA project back in 2003. It was called Kalo. So it started with military research, and it was kind of a fantasy. And then 10 years later, a Halo character has become real.
Yep. Very interesting, the evolution of things. But, well, I mean, that's all the questions I had prepped and ready for you today. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything you want to leave anybody with?
Yes, I do. I have something very exciting. We're doing the IOHK Summit. It's iohksummit.io. It's April 17th to 18th. Everybody from IOHK is going to be there. It's in Miami. Rudy Rucker just agreed to speak. We're going to have two great musical guests. I can't quite announce them yet. We already sent them. We already got the contract signed and everything, but we're just waiting for the agent to let us say it. But let me just tell you, these are wonderful musical guests. They've been around for a long time. There's going to be a hackathon with Plutus. All of our scientists are going to be there. All of our engineers are going to be there. I think we have 26 workshops covering everything from is reality made from computation to how zero knowledge proofs work. We're going to also have a lot of presentations. I'm going to give a keynote, talk about Cardano 2020. And if there's ever a time for me to launch a new product, this would be a place to do that at. Not saying we are, but if we ever were going to do that, it would be here.
In a hypothetical situation.
And we'll have a lot of Exactly. We have a lot of goodies that we'll give out. I think we made a deal with Tangem, so everybody will get one of those wallets if they register. And we'll also have a puzzle where we're going to take an ADA wallet and take the 12 keywords and break them into 4 different puzzles. And if you solve all of them, the first person to solve them gets all the ADA in the wallet.
Oh, cool.
So if you're really feeling ambitious and you think that you're up for the task, the first puzzle will be on the T-shirt, and the other 3 will be scattered throughout the conference hall. Come on down. So just great opportunity to meet all of us. The entire company will be there. I'll be there, and we'll bring a lot of cool guests. We're getting a lot of interesting people. I'm trying to put a very special panel together, but again, I can't announce that until we finalize it. There's going to be a lot of scientists there, some from industry. I think Christian Cashin and John Katz and others are coming. Cashin did Fabric. Katz kind of invented half of crypto. I think the Definity guys are coming, and that'll be fun. And we're going to hope to have some debates about scaling, like the Promote is coming from Unity, so we'll be able to talk about Prism and all his cool things he's working on.
Very cool.
And all these other protocols. So it's just going to be a great event, April 17th to 18th. You got to come. It's going to be awesome, I assure you, and it'll be life-changing. It's just, yeah, it's great. First time I've ever done a conference. I just bring your friends, bring your grandma, bring your uncle who's crazy and lives in the attic. Just get them to come. It's going to be great. IOHKSummit.io.
It sounds like it's going to be a great time. Florida's
Yes.
good. Florida's good too that time of the year, so it'll be nice and
And
warm as well.
if you like alligators, you can go to the Everglades and hang out with the alligators. You like the beach? It's on Miami Beach. It's going
Yeah,
to be a beautiful area. Just go there. If you like crazy people that try to sell you hamburgers in the gas station, we'll probably find one for you. So,
it's
so
true.
come on
You
down.
find
It's going to
everything
be
in
great.
Florida.
They got everything there. Yeah, they
Gotta
even
love
have
it.
cannibals. I mean, it's like
Oh God,
it's crazy. It's like Florida's just a wonderland. They got Disney World.
the
Come on,
diversity that they
bring the
have.
family. So go for 2 days and then go to Disney World and
It's a good idea.
enjoy Disney World, right? See all the cool stuff you can do. The Caribbean is close by. It's like takes an hour to fly out to a cool Caribbean island. So
Also
go to
true.
an island vacation after coming and learning about the magic of IOHK.
Well, hopefully everybody does. So I guess you'll find out, right?
Right. I'll be like, well, I guess nobody likes me. I,
No, I
we're
doubt
kind of
that. I'm
trying to
sure it's
feel
going
the
to be a huge
greetings.
success.
I hope so. We'd hope to have a few thousand people, but if anything, all the IOHK people will be there. So
It's true. Still be a
you
good
know,
time.
if you might get lucky, and there's only a few people who attend outside IOHK, so you just get to hang out with us, and we'll pretend like you belong to our company.
There you go. Oh man. Well, it has been a pleasure having you on again. Thank you so much. If you guys are curious about other content, I did do a full review video and an update for Cardano. And I also did interview Charles in the past, so there's a bunch of other content there if you're interested in looking it up. Again, Charles, thank you, and I wish you the best of luck this year.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.